This week on the Men at the Movies podcast, we try to ride the coattails of Weird, the Al Yankovic story, by talking about UHF. In this movie, we find leadership lessons from George Newman and dig into the gospel according to Stanely Spudowski. When you give misfits a voice, it challenges the system and offers hope to the people around us. And those are the ones we are called to impact. Badgers? We don't need no stinking badgers. So let's discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name's Paul McDonald, and joining me in the room, in the study, in the house is Britt Mooney. Hey man, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. How you doing?
Great. Glad to see you. We get to share some time. Britt's on his way up from Atlanta to the middle of the fabulous state of North Carolina for a conference. And he's like, hey, I can make a pit stop in Charlotte and we can sit down and do our first podcast together in over a month.
I know, it's been so long.
We might forget how to do this. We'll see how it goes. Several weeks ago, I was watching Rambo Part 2 with my son.
Yeah, you were.
That was a mistake. That's such a terrible movie. But we watched it. We also watched Predator that same, maybe night or at least weekend. Predator, much better.
Oh, yeah.
But when I was watching Rambo, I texted Britt. I was like, all I can do is see the Rambo character from UHF where
he does the mouth.
Yeah. Or he's just super muscled and veiny and just shooting everything and nobody's shooting him. And I was like, all I can do is see, I feel like that movie is a spoof internally of the same movie.
All right. So
he's like, dude, I'd love to do UHF. So I was like, all right, well, we did our blockbusters. We've been cranking through the archives and stuff. And so I'm like, all right, first one back, we can do UHF. And really, as we look at the movie, this one's, it's better than Idiocracy.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna go out on a limb. My hot take. It's better than Idiocracy. We're doing this. One of the reasons, because Britt wanted to, but the other is there's a Weird Al movie coming out. It'll be out by the time this airs. So the Weird Al Yankovic story. And if you're listening to this podcast, odds are that you are also a Weird Al fan. Going back to, we were talking before the podcast about, fat,
eat it.
Yeah. Yeah, like a surgeon.
Like a surgeon.
What was it? I think we're a clone. I think I'm a clone now. And those are the stuff from that's 80s stuff.
Oh, man.
He's still doing, the Yoda song or a long, long time ago.
Yeah. Well, that was even 15 years ago when they did the prequels.
And he's still coming out with stuff.
Oh, still.
And my wife hates it. She hates it when I ruin music, but when somebody does it and makes a living at it. Like, really? I make up words all the time to songs, mostly because I don't actually know the words to the songs. So we're like, oh, this works perfect. We'll talk about UHF, right? We'll jump on the boot heels. What's the word? What's the term?
The coattails.
Coattails. That's the word. Well, we're riding the coattails of the Weird Al movie, which we haven't seen yet because it's not out yet when we're recording this. So when we look at this, and we're not going to go through the theme of the movie, it's, it's basically dodgeball with a radio station.
Well, as I was watching it this past time,
which I also watched recently with my son.
Oh, I like dodgeball is also very funny. As I was watching it this last time, there really is a lot of Naked Gun, airplane humor in it. So it's modeled, it's kind of a mashup of Weird Al and his songs and what he's doing and his crazy sense of humor. But it's also modeled in a large way after Airplane and
picked the wrong day to quit smoking.
Yeah. Wrong day to stop sniffing glue. It's kind of not a takeoff, but it's really in that wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Because yes, there's just the normal storyline. The storyline itself is pretty simple because he's just throwing all sorts of stuff against the wall along the way. But I think this is a good movie for our podcast in this sense, because when he needs inspiration, he goes to movies in his mind. Like when he's thinking about what kind of person he wants to be, what kind of hero he wants to be. And yes, they do it in this really funny way, but like when he's going to go save Stanley, that's when we get the Rambo montage in his brain. And
it opens with Indiana Jones.
And so you get some of that, he's riffing off of popular culture, which is his whole shtick.
Which is his jam.
That's his whole shtick is yes, we have this popular culture that is so hugely popular. I'm just going to make
Weird
fun of it.
Al has a Hamilton polka with the songs from the musical Hamilton set to polka, like almost all the songs, like a medley of Hamilton. It's phenomenal.
Well, he's a master at the accordion, and that's what he did growing up was polka. I mean, so he's just really, really good at that. And all that to say is it's a funny movie. I saw this in the theater. That's how old I am. And laughed my butt off in the theater. And I have the Blu-ray copy of this because it is one of those movies that it's like every now and then I just want to pull out and watch. And it's not easy to find sometimes on streaming services because it's not one of those movies for a lot of people.
I would guess that this movie, which is Weird Al's credited as one of the writers, I would guess that it sort of parallels his life. I would be surprised if what we see in the Weird Al movie where Daniel Radcliffe's playing Al Yankovic, if it's not there's going to, like I said, there's going to be a lot of parallels between George Newman, his character in UHF, and Weird Al.
Yeah.
Because what you see in the beginning is this guy who and his girlfriend said, we got to find a way to make that overactive imagination work for you. Because he's always seeing something. And I had somebody, we were up at midnight texting each other and we're like, why are we up so late? And he said, it's the curse of the creative mind because we see opportunity in everything.
Right.
Like, oh, look, there's an old sink by the side of the road. I can fix that up and make it this. I can do this and make it this. And you're constantly, you see what it could be in everything.
Yeah.
And that's what Weird Al does. And I think my guess, I don't know his story, but I would imagine that he struggled doing things the way that people said he should, but found success when he's like, yeah, but this is what I think's funny. This is where I'm engaged. And it's not about finding something that appeals to everyone, but it's about doing something that sort of makes his heart come alive even in the movie, he's got one of his songs basically in it, the Ballad of Jed Clampett, the Beverly Hillbillies theme song set to, I Love My MTV or Money for Nothing.
Money for Nothing.
Yeah. So it's set for that tune, but that's what he does.
And I didn't realize this until this last time I watched it. Mark Knopfler, the guy from Dire Straits, the lead singer, guitar player, very amazing guitar player, blues guy. He actually played guitar. He played the guitar on Weird Al's version of it, which if you know anything about Mark Knopfler completely makes sense because he really does not take himself very seriously at all. And so I agree with you. I think that that's also one of the attractive things about this movie to me is how I think we all like to be around somebody who sees potential, who sees value in things that, the way I would put it, other people would throw away. Other people would be like, you know what? It's done. It's over. And yet there's something redemptive about seeing those things repurposed somehow. And I believe that's a big part of the gospel is that there's so many stories in the scripture of people, Abraham, no kids or whatever, like
Moses in a basket.
Moses in a basket. Even Moses at 80 years old. Just,
right.
Like people, someone that
shepherd in Midian, and they're like, hey, go back. Go back to where you ran.
Yes, right.
40 years ago.
Yeah, God was showing me stuff about that today in my car ride too, but that's a whole nother story. But, there's so many instances in the scripture of a person that everyone else would have dismissed, God being used or God using.
Yeah.
God being interested in, God saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to use this person. And he's interested in that. And that is so important to our understanding of who God is and what the gospel is that God sees potential where other people see trash, basically. And Weird Al has that in this movie. And that's one of the most endearing qualities about this movie. And I think why but we like a lot of movies that, like The Replacements did that. Like there are a lot of movies that do this. And one of the reasons we do this podcast is say, well, why do people enjoy that? It's because we want to believe that's true. We want to believe that you can be 80 years old or however old, Colonel Sanders was, a failure his whole life. And he said, well, maybe if I just go door to door, people like my chicken. Like crazy.
We're going back to Spaceballs. What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
And all of that is to kind of point us to God's love for us, that, and I think we feel that way about ourselves. I think we feel that way about ourselves. I'm too old. I'm too this. I'm too fat. I'm too tall. I'm too dumb. I'm too tired. I'm too busy. Like we're always too something. And God's like, yeah, but if we tweak these things, man, we could repurpose it for something totally new, and everyone would see the value in this. And, one of my favorite, this is cheesy, but one of my favorite songs back from it was like the 80s, maybe the early 90s, was A Touch of a Master's Hand. Remember this song?
No, I do not.
Wayne Watson, I believe, was his name. And basically,
this is part of your Christian geek music.
No, it should be, although it was definitely not rock. Definitely not rock. But dude, this song used to make me, when God was really dealing with my heart, getting me to die to myself. And I was a Christian already, but I needed some help. And
what? We still need to keep dying to ourselves daily? What?
And I was listening to the Christian radio, and this song would come on. This is one of the songs I would cry during often, because basically it was an auction, and this old, really ratty violin comes up for auction, and no one wants it until someone comes up, a violin master comes up and just plays this beautiful song on it. And now everybody wants it. And the difference was the master. The difference was it was in somebody's hands who knew what to do with it.
Yeah.
And that's who God is. God's like, I know you may feel pushed aside, as Paul and I have both felt this weekend. You may have felt pushed aside, but just let me handle it. Just let me tell my story through who you are, and you'll see. And you've got a great quote about the disciples.
Yeah.
I would love if you shared that here, because I again, it shows us that, like, so often we think, well, for God to use me, I need boom, 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 boom. And he's like, no, you just need me. God's like, no, just me. That's it. That's all you need. And so I love that quote.
So if you've been tracking this podcast at all, you know that I'm going through the Bible in a year with some friends of mine, and we just started the Gospel of Mark. It was such a relief to get into the New Testament. We're like, imagine the guys who finally reached the oasis after going through the desert, and they're dry and dusty, clothes are tattered. And the New Testament is just like, oh, it's like jumping in the pool. So we read Mark 1 and 2, and a friend of mine, Patrick, who's been on the podcast a couple times, and he said, I found it interesting today that after Jesus called Simon and Andrew, he walked down the beach a little way and found James and John.
Right?
1/3 of the 12, right? The disciples, arguably all of the three that were closest to him, all within just a few feet of each other. All 4 of them were fishermen. He didn't have to put out a solicitation on disciplematch.com or hire headhunters to find the most elite disciples in the world. What are the chances that the 12 that God would trust with carrying the gospel to the world were right there next to him, just a few feet away? Are we looking too far away for our calling or blessing or ministry or brotherhood, or is it available just a few feet away?
I love it, man. You read that before we started. I just thought that was so profound because we do. And we'll get to it towards the end of the movie. Maybe some of the people you've been dismissing in a way, even some people that seem resistant.
Right.
Maybe they're not that resistant. One of my favorite kind of reimaginings of scripture that have happened in the last couple of years, not all of scripture, but just this one verse, someone was talking about Psalm 23. Mm-hmm. God prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I'd always thought, and I don't know if I'd heard it taught this way, but it was almost like mocking your enemies. It's almost like, oh yeah, you're going to put me down, but guess what?
I got a table.
I got a feast.
Yeah.
God's giving me wealth and a feast, whatever, spiritually, metaphorically, whatever. But I heard someone say, what if that's to invite your enemies to the table? And I thought that was beautiful. I was like, because unless it's the devil and that demons, so many people who think they're my enemies aren't my enemies. And, cheesy, but what's one of the best ways to make your enemy, to defeat your enemy is to make him your friend.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the best ways. And George tries to do that in this movie, but, I think all of those sort of themes in this movie, as simple and as silly as it is, because I think that comes across in Weird Al's stuff, is he does have a good heart. I think people can see that. He's genuine. As much as he's doing fat and some really just gross stuff and it's silly.
Amish paradise. But there's still a part of him that you can tell he's not being mean. He's just being silly. And he's actually got a good heart to him. And I think that his genuineness comes across. And I think you see that in this movie, that as silly as it is, and it's, oh my gosh, my kids, because we just watched Gandhi recently. My kids and I watched Gandhi. And when they did Gandhi. Are you excited about Gandhi too?
Oh my God. My kids were they were laughing and looking at me like, is it okay to laugh at this? That's just so weird. But again, yes, there are probably some things in this movie that wouldn't fly in 2022, especially some of the Asian stuff and some of the, but I think that his good-heartedness, and so all of those themes, like you're talking about, his story and his imagination and his willingness to do some things that are different and off the wall, it comes across in the movie, and I think it's actually really instructive for us as Christians who are supposed to be aliens and strangers, who are supposed to be different, who are supposed to be weird, who Jesus says, you see the wind, you don't see the wind. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know where it's going. So are the people who follow the Spirit, who are born of the Spirit. And that doesn't mean that people born of the Spirit are unreliable. It just means they're unpredictable because they're not operating by the same rules everybody's operating by.
Well, hang on, because that's a really good, I want you to talk about, the difference between unreliable and unpredictable. Because the other word that, you're talking about somebody who would be called flighty.
Right. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse to be flighty.
Right, because Jesus also says, let your yes be yes.
Let your no be no.
Have integrity, basically.
Have integrity. So I'll give you a story from my life.
Yeah.
I was in my 3rd year teaching, and I loved my job. All my family lived near me. All Becca's family, my wife, all her family lived near us. We loved our church. My mentor was like a father to me. And God said, go to Korea. Wait. I'm too tall. I don't like the food.
You don't know Korean.
I don't know Korean. Becca is fluent in German. We thought we were going to, if we would love to maybe teach overseas. We were rocking it. in Atlanta, in the Atlanta area. We were rocking it. And God said, go to Korea. That's unpredictable. But I finished my contract at school.
Mm-hmm.
I had conversations with people about it. Like, this wasn't like I just picked up the next day and left and said, screw you guys, I'm out of here. God said go, and I'm going to leave my principal in a lurch, right?
Right.
Without finishing my contract, without making sure I left well, right? Does that make sense? That's the difference between unpredictable and unreliable. I'm still a person of my word, and I'm still a person of integrity. God will never ask you to do things that go against integrity. He won't do it.
Well, that idea of you'll know them by their fruit.
You'll know them by their fruit.
And is the fruit, like if the fruit of unreliable is a mess in your wake.
Yes.
Like you said, you'd leave your principal in the lurch, your family, because you were unreliable. Versus unpredictable is and it's interesting. I have a similar story, not to Korea, but I was working in the emergency department here in town, and I knew my time here is done. But I didn't have somewhere to go. I knew that I was called to leave, but not until I had somewhere to go to. It's like I wasn't running from something. I was running to something.
Right.
And that same idea of, I love that twist of, am I leaving them in the lurch? What's the wake? What's the fruit of this action?
Man, yeah.
And if it's negative, if it's rotten fruit, then it's probably a rotten decision.
God is more interested. It's not that he's not interested in you obeying him, but he's more interested in your character along the way. Because your character is what speaks to people.
Because he said, go to Korea. And our next question is, okay, when? Because
right?
It's not necessarily this second.
And there was a whole process for that. Well, I won't get into here.
Right.
But part of the process was talking to my parents, talking to different people, talking to my mentor, and getting there, yes, you should do this. There's also telling people, because to a lot of people, it was unpredictable. Like, why would we leave? Like, in the worldly sense, there was no reason for us to leave. And so there were some people who weren't believers who, like, why would you do this? It was unpredictable to them. But if you know God, it's a plot twist. It's not, it doesn't mean that you're unreliable. It just means, man, sometimes God says, pick up like Abraham, just pick up your stuff and go. Now, he had a whole household to deal with. So, there was planning involved, and they were, right? I mean, like, it wasn't unreliable. It was just unpredictable. And that's who we are in God. And yet our character is very important. And I can't even take credit for it. I'm just telling you, this is what God dealt with me, because there have been times when I've had to leave ministries, or I've had to leave whatever, a church I was attending, or like, God never let me just leave. Yeah. Like, stop showing up. Because it was like you're saying, I'm not running from this.
Right.
I have something else that God's called me to. And I would, if I knew the leader or whoever was there, I made sure to communicate with them. I love you. I'm leaving well.
Right.
Right. And if you've ever been in the missions world, there are a lot of people who do not leave well, even Christians, because you start to mentally, emotionally check out. And I'm not saying I'm just saying God was like a taskmaster with, you will not do this. You will honor people when you leave. You will do this. Like, okay. But it helped me to make sure my head was still in the game while I was there. Because if I die tomorrow, I don't want to have been emotionally checked out where I was. But that's what I mean about, you can be unpredictable because you're being led by an unseen wind, but man, you still got to have that character. It's like the gifts of the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit. Like, they got to go together.
Right.
You can't have the power of God without his character, because the power of God without his character is abuse. And so you just got to figure that stuff out. So I just did a little sermon there, but
yeah, that was not in our notes. So that's a little bonus material, unprepared, as you said, following the winds of the Spirit. And I was reading a book this week, and when it was going over the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness.
Right.
and how Satan, with the first temptation, he said, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread, because he knew Jesus was hungry. And for years, a lot of times I've heard it said that that's a sort of casting aspersion, doubting his identity. Like, no, because Satan knew who he was.
Yes.
What it wasn't like, it wasn't doubting his authority and his identity. It was actually, are you going to depend on yourself to feed yourself?
I just wrote this. Go ahead. That's so good.
Or are you going to depend on God? Because it was the Spirit that drove him into the wilderness. It was like, again,
and the spirit that
led him.
Right. And the Spirit told him to fast.
Right.
So where's your dependence? Is it on food? Or is there something deeper you're depending on?
Right.
And that's the lie. It wasn't about the bread.
The temptation was, would he be a man, or would he sort of tap into God? Basically, would he get what his physical needs were in his own effort?
Right.
Which is the temptation.
Right.
Which is our temptation.
Right.
Am I going to work to manipulate, to control the situation, to make my physical needs met through my own
efforts? Right. By the way, this was also the Jesus they called a glutton and a drunkard.
Right.
But he was obeying. When he went to eat with sinners, he was obeying. When he was fasting in the wilderness, he was obeying. Like, that's the core. Like, that's the unpredictable.
There's times the whole city showed up for healing and he healed them. There's times that everyone showed up. He's like, we're going to the next town. But the lines.
I know, man.
We're rolling.
So to bring it back to the movie, this is what George does when he gets an opportunity to start to run a TV show.
It looks better than I thought.
I wrote that line down. And there's something so childlike in a good way about that.
Yeah.
And I think it's another thing that's endearing about him. He's kind of childlike.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes childish, but he's childlike in his wonder and silliness, right? But you know, yes, he lost his job and there was that whole thing, but he has an opportunity now. That's a throwaway opportunity. Like, no one wants this TV station. This is a piece of junk. It's nothing. Like, they're just putting the deed in the pot.
It was a throwaway.
It was a throwaway deed, a throwaway TV station in a game of poker or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so his uncle gets it, and his wife's like, just give it to George. He needs something to do. Like, it's all throwaway stuff. And yet George sees it as, this is what I've been waiting for.
This is an opportunity to make that overactive imagination work for you.
This is what I've been waiting for. Yeah. And because he could have just gone along with other people who were like, this is trash and this is going to fail and whatever. You're set up for failure. But he sees it as an opportunity, but he's willing to jump. He's willing to jump. You know, I think I was talking about it before. It was one of my favorite Steve Harvey things, his little inspirational videos where he's like, man, at some point, if you're going to be successful, you got to jump. You're going to have to, it feels like jumping off of something. Like you're just going to have to jump in. And I've been there in several instances in my life, whether that's missions or planning a church or starting a different job or whatever it's been. I've been there.
Or literally bungee jumping.
But he's willing to do that. And that's one of the things about this movie is like, sometimes, man, sometimes we don't see the opportunities for what they are because we're listening to everybody else. But sometimes God's like, no. And it can be as simple, by the way. It doesn't have to be a TV station, right? That's the story. But it can be as simple as, like, on Sunday morning, when the 3-year-old starts talking to me and we start church 5 minutes late because I'd rather sit and talk to the 3-year-old. God's like, no, talk to her. Ask her questions. Like, take advantage of this moment. This right here is what I want you to do. This is more important. Her heart right now is more important than starting at 10 o'clock. And so I did. But that's how you live. And but if you're not paying attention, if you don't have the awareness, if you've got your blinders on, I just got to get through my ministry, because it happens in churches too. I just got to get through my ministry stuff. Then you miss sometimes the opportunities of the hearts of people right around you. And George doesn't. The same heart that saw, this is better than I even imagined. And it's like a trashed, abandoned warehouse looking place. It's so awesome. But he does the same thing with people. When the Fran Dresser, the receptionist, she's like, oh, she's so frustrated that there's a new owner because she thinks this is an obstacle for her getting her dream. So she's yelling at him, and he's like, hi, and
this is Bob.
And I love this. It's such a misfit movie, and you guys know, if you've been listening to this at all, I love the misfits, because we are aliens and strangers. God takes these people and uses them and puts them together in a way that is his church.
Well, and if you do any sort of biographical reading of anyone who's outwardly successful, they feel like misfits. I read a book a few years ago on the big coaches of the 80s.
Ditka.
Not Ditka.
Ditka was in the 80s.
Well, it was sort of, yes, but it was Joe Gibbs, for the formerly known Washington Redskins, Bill Parcells,
right,
and Bill Walsh for the 49ers.
Yeah.
But Bill Walsh was so plagued with doubts and insecurities. Like, even after successful seasons, he was afraid that he didn't know what he was doing.
Imposter syndrome.
Right. And I think that everyone feels that way. Just some people are better at hiding it than others.
You're right.
Like, I'm sure Bill Parcells felt that way. And that probably is why he's such a was back in those days, such a gruff. He wasn't a friendly guy. He was sort of like Bill Belichick is these days.
Right. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So you wouldn't say, wow, he's warm and fuzzy.
That's a good comparison.
They're driven by their internal.
Yeah, that can be good and bad, right?
Right. But going back to, because I want to play a clip. We have them. I pulled them. Let's play one.
Let's do that.
Because I think there is value in that concept. Not just seeing advantage in the sort of more tangible circumstances, opportunities that we have. But we have George takes over. He goes to the network, the big boys. He's hoping to build a relationship, collaborate. It doesn't go well because the guy is kind of a jerk. He is evil incarnate, and he fires the janitor who's Kramer. In this movie, or in this, he's called Stanley. What's his last name?
Spudowski, man.
Stanley Spudowski.
He's the hero of the whole movie.
Right. But we don't know that yet. We see he's kind of a doofus, kind of doesn't know what he's doing. He loves being a janitor. And so as George is leaving the network, he sees, as they're taking, his company clothes, his mop. And so George walks up to this situation, and like you said, sees the opportunity in the person.
That's my mop!
Not anymore, buddy.
Hey, are you all right?
It's just not fair.
Come on, forget about it. It's only a mop.
Only a mop. Only a mop. You don't understand. That mop was given to me for my birthday when I was 8 years old. We've never been apart. Now I don't even have a job anymore. After 15 years, they just tossed me out like an old bag of moldy tangerines. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?
Well, maybe you could come work for me.
Really? You mean it?
Sure, I guess we could use a janitor.
Stanely Spudowski.
George Newman.
Oh, I'm mighty glad to meet you, George. Hey, I'm gonna do a really good job. You won't be sorry. I'm really gonna do a good job for you, George. I'm a good janitor. Want me to clean your glasses for you?
No, that...
I'll make them real shiny, real shiny. Because we're friends, huh, George? We're friends.
It's got a definite Rain Man feel to it. I'm definitely a good janitor. But that, again, the misfit, because George knows he's an oddball. Just like we know we're oddballs.
Right.
That idea that he doesn't even know this guy's name, and he sees a guy, he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I lost my mop. Obviously, Stanley's love language is gifts. Because we see his response to getting a trophy later in the movie. But he says, come work with me. Because if you are a misfit, there's always room for more misfits.
Well, it's such a heart of compassion, because think about this. If you get fired, that's a mark against you. Like, wouldn't most people go, well, why did he fire you? But this is a successful TV station. Like, they fired you. Why would I?
I should be trying to model my station after this station because they're a success.
But he doesn't do that. It's all compassion. And it's all about, giving people a chance, giving people a role. And that's important, is because, talk about often there's intimacy and purpose, but those are the two things every person longs for. And so what he does with these people is he gives them a purpose, but he doesn't and he gives them a role, like with the receptionist, like, okay, you're the newswoman now. With Stanley, okay, you can be my janitor. I guess we could use a janitor. And you see, like, oh, I get to be a janitor. And by the way, there's the gospel according to Stanley Spudowski. And it is how a servant becomes the hero.
Yeah.
And it is the first become the first or last, and the last are first. So many will say, all that sort of stuff. And many who we think are whoever, the smart, the intelligent, the talented in the kingdom, God sees something different. And not that he doesn't love them, but he sees something different. He sees the misfits, the broken. He likes that. Because he's creative. Because here's what creativity, here's what creativity is, okay? Creativity is finding a new solution to a problem. Okay? And creativity gives people hope. Because when they see something that they haven't seen before, they go, oh, because sometimes you feel stuck in one or two choices. But when somebody gives you a third choice, oh, wait a minute, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Right? And that's creativity. So you can be creative as a janitor. You can be creative as anything. And so creativity is very valuable in any industry, any job. And so he gives people role and then sets them free in it. Like, I don't see at any point in this show, in the movie, where George Newman, Weird Al, is like, oh man, you know what? I don't really like your show. If you could do this, I think people would like it more.
He didn't give notes to Raul saying maybe don't throw the poodles out the window.
Nature's suction cups, turtles. And so, but that it's important. He just lets them be who they are. Okay, here's your role. You just go be you.
Yeah.
Just go be you. And that's such a gift for our identity. And God does the same thing. When he gives us purpose, he's like, I don't care if anybody watches it. Just go be you.
Yeah.
And it'll all work out. But even George had to kind of deal with some of this, because as the TV station, starts to fail, he wants to give up, and he goes out to the bar and whatever. And again, he throws something away. The show that it was
he was on a show. He was all depressed because his girl left him, and so he says, Stanley, you want to be a TV star?
Oh, you just want to
you want to be on TV?
You want to be on TV?
Yeah, it's all yours.
It's all yours.
But again, he was trying to do something that wasn't his gifting.
It wasn't his gift.
But when Stanley takes over, everything's up to the right.
Everything, and it's so immediate. Like the movie is so funny.
By the time they get to the bar, the entire bar is engaged.
It's like he's back on.
Yeah, and Stanley's just being Stanley.
He's just being himself.
He's his joy is infectious, and he even very Forrest Gump like. Even through the TV, encourages a down in the dumps, just starting to drink a blueberry daiquiri, George Newman.
This is my new mop. George, my friend, he gave me this mop. It's a pretty good mop. It's not as good as my first mop. I miss my first mop. But this is still a good mop. Sometimes you just have to take what life gives you. Because life is like a mop. And sometimes life gets full of dirt and crud and bugs and hairballs and stuff. You got to clean it out. You got to put it in here and rinse it off and start all over again. And sometimes life sticks to the floor so bad. You know, a mop is not good enough. It's not good enough. You got to get down there like with a toothbrush, you know, and you got to really scrub. You got to get it off. You got to really try to get it off. But if that doesn't work, you can't give up. You gotta stand right up. You gotta run to a window and say, "Hey, these floors are dirty as hell, and I'm not gonna take it anymore."
The whole bar is cheering, like Britt's cheering over here.
The gospel according to Stanley Spudowski. So here we see, as silly and as funny as it is, there's insight here. Right there, he's enduring. There's endurance. He's had to endure some things, and so he has something to share too.
Right.
1 Corinthians 14 says, "When you come together, each one of you has something to share." It's not, and you should bring it. Like, don't come to receive, come to give. Come to church to give. Why? Because God's given you something to share, and so share it. And when all share, all are blessed. That's the model. That's the body. That's what bodies do, right? And so anyway, so he's given the opportunity to have a voice, even though, I mean, you can say it wasn't really good leadership on George's part because he's really quitting. He's like, "I said I'm out. I give up." And sometimes we got to get there, man. Sometimes we got to get to the give up place of like, okay, I give up. What do I do?
Right.
Something new, and then. Now God uses that. Okay. If you're ready to give up, now I got a solution. And so he tries to, work with that. And so I was just saying all that to say that he's given a role, he's given a voice, and that's good kingdom leadership. Jesus did the same thing. Like these three stooges sort of disciples that he had. Like, they said some boneheaded stuff.
They didn't understand the mission.
They didn't get it. But you know what he did? He sent them out 2 by 2.
Yeah.
And they said, "Okay, come back. Tell me what happened." Like, he still gives them a role.
Right.
He still gives them something to do. He
doesn't say, once you've finished this discipleship program and then accomplished these things, then I'm going to give you authority.
Right.
No, he's like, all authority in heaven has been given to me. Now go. Now I'm giving it to you.
But he did it at the 72 as well. Like, I mean, they didn't even have the Holy Spirit yet. I mean, he did give them authority to cast out spirits and stuff like that. And he gives them instructions, and then he goes, "Okay, now go 2 by 2. There's a meaning in that. He didn't send them out by one. He sent them out with somebody else.
That's from Ecclesiastes, right? Or Proverbs.
Well, that's part of it too.
If one falls down, woe to him who doesn't have somebody to help pick him up.
And so all that. So here's what George does, and George does it with so many people that he builds a community.
Yeah.
And that comes across on his TV station to where it's so ridiculous, because back in the day, if you don't know what a UHF station was, this was back when they used to broadcast television over the airwaves.
Before remotes.
Well, there might have been remotes, but
I don't know. All I knew is I had a VHF dial and a UHF dial.
Yeah. And so I was the remote, basically.
Right.
My dad and
And sometimes the rabbit ears.
and sometimes the rabbit ears. And God forbid that my dad would want to channel surf.
Oh no. That didn't happen.
Because especially if you're going from like a major V8, not VHF, what was it?
Yeah,
VHF?
Yeah.
Major
VHF
station to a UHF station, because you had to go back and forth and do all the whole thing. No, go back. The commercial here, so go over there. Anyway, all I have to say is for a UHF station to beat a major network,
almost as difficult as trying to find Stranger Fiction on a streaming service.
Almost. That'll be a miracle one day. And like that is so ridiculous, but in the movie they do. Like,
yeah.
And here's the thing, and I wrote this down. Like when you give misfits a voice, it challenges the system, because the world's systems are not designed for misfits. The kingdom is designed for misfits, and the world systems are not. The world systems are designed for you to fit by their rules.
Right.
That's the whole point of the system.
But it's to conform to those standards.
It's
right?
conformity. And
look like we look.
No, that's right.
Do what we do.
That's right.
Wear a suit, wear a tie, do this, do that.
Right. And even nonconformists are conforming to something. Because nonconformists, God told me this a long time ago, don't be a nonconformist. Because I used to think that was my job. Well, I'm weird. I'm different. I'm a whatever. He's like, no, if you try to be a misfit, you ruin it.
Right.
Because if you're being a nonconformist, the standard is still conformity.
Right. You're like the negative in a camera. You're just taking the opposite, but it's still using those standards.
It's still worldly thinking.
Right.
You just be you.
Yeah. You
just follow me. You just have your voice that I've given you. And don't worry if it's being a misfit or not. Don't worry if it's weird or strange or if it fits in or people like it or they don't. Like that's who you are. But it challenges the system. But it's also genuine. People do enjoy genuineness more than not. And so when that genuineness comes across, even if it's a wheel of fish,
wheel of fish.
But to your point before, which I thought that was why Patrick's quote there was so insightful, even for this movie, is that who is he giving TV shows to? His friends.
Right.
The karate guy he knows. Yeah. And then,
Bob was his account manager guy. And he was bringing in the people that he knew.
Yeah.
Even Stanley.
Like,
I just ran into him. So, hey, you wanna follow me?
Yeah. He didn't have this application process to find a janitor. He just, proximity is this really amazing thing with God. Like you said,
like we've been put in the place where we are for a reason.
Right.
Like a tree. Somebody said, we frequently compare ourselves or want to be like trees planted by streams of water. But the thing about trees is they're planted.
Right.
They don't move quickly.
No.
They impact the environment that is in their closest proximity.
Right. And they give shade to that proximity.
People come to them.
Yes.
For the fruit,
for
the shade, for the trees, the birds, and the all the things come to them.
Right. That's so good. And so you see that in the movies where now George is becoming popular, not George himself, but the TV station. And that threatens the system.
George is still weird as ever.
He's still weird as ever, but that threatens the TV station. And that's the threat is money. And their solution isn't to try to be creative now. The solution is to try to put the creative people down, and it's a very tropish sort of.
What's happening.
But I want to talk about a couple more things with Stanely Spudowski's The Gospel According to Stanley. Is so there's one point where one of the games is finding the marble in the oatmeal, which is just this amazing, this big.
I found it.
And this little kid finally, he goes, Now your reward is to drink from the fire hose. And God showed me, like, as silly as this is, and I used to think that was one of the funniest parts of the movie, because that little kid gets knocked, across the room by the fire hose. But that's how the kingdom is. Like, sometimes God says, you got to dig a little bit for this. But once you get it, like, you think, oh, I'm just looking for...
The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure in the field.
A treasure in the field. And once you get it, you're like...
great price.
This is worth everything.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a marble. Like, this is a secret I just didn't know I needed. But, like, you have ownership in it because you looked for it. Like, God wants to give us ownership, just like George does as a leader. He gives people ownership. You get to have your show. You get to have your show, as weird as it is, different as it is. And then even when they get into trouble because, story reasons,
because it has to happen.
RJ has a chance to buy the station and close it down. And so now they got to raise money, but they're raising money with ownership. Now you get to have, this isn't just a gift. You get to have stakes.
Neither Stanley nor George were going to be the owners.
No.
The community was going to own the
community was going to own
like
it.
the Packers. It's football season. We're talking
there you
football
go.
now.
There you go. And again, but I like that. And then at the end, it's, when they're standing up to the system, because the system thinks people are stupid.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the things that kind of gets RJ in trouble, because they're like, well, what about the community? Well, here's what I think about the community. And he just puts the community down, even though he wants them all to watch his station because that's going to get him money. And right. It's the wrong thing.
And I'm going to break that down on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
I have the clip of what he says, because I think that's a good insight into the mindset of our enemy.
Yes.
So check that out on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. But towards the end, Stanley says, let's see if I can find it. There comes a time in every man's life when he has to look the potato of injustice right in the eye. He's trying to inspire people.
Right.
It's such a silly line. But again, Stanley is talking about digging for something rare, and worth it. He talks about endurance with the mop. Life is like a mop, and now he's talking about the potato of injustice, right in the eye. But he's talking about standing up against injustice. Like, this isn't just simply we get to be happy. Like, there's purpose in this. So we're doing something that matters here. And it's the same way in the kingdom. Like, for me to say the kingdom is for misfits, it sounds very nice, and we like talking about, okay, there's a place for you and all that stuff. But here's what's happening is God is building his temple where he's going to live forever out of misfits. We're called living stones, not bricks. It was against the law in the Old Testament to make an altar out of bricks, out of anything man-made. It was against the law. You had to use only natural stones. And I've never built something with natural stones like that, but you have to, in order for it to have any sort of level thing at the top for you to use it, like, you have to think about this. Like, It's very intensive with your creativity, and like, ooh, this rock will fit right here, and this stone will fit here. This one's bigger, this one's smaller. But no two stones are the same, but they're all stones. And it's the same way in the kingdom. So God is building a temple out of stones, not bricks. And what that means, but he's building it out of eternal material, right? We're born again. That's a whole nother discussion. But my point is that it's not just that there's a place for you when there's not it's that he's actually building you into something with purpose. He's going to live in us forever. And so here, Stanley is like, look, this is bigger than just one TV show against a station against another TV station. We're fighting a system that thinks differently about you than we think about you. Like, this is bigger than that. So come have ownership in our vision of what that is.
Yeah.
Come have ownership in
where
that.
you have value.
Where you have value.
Your expression matters.
Where your expression matter. And then towards the end of the movie, one of my favorite parts when we talk about leadership is, Terry is George's girlfriend, played by Victoria. She was from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And she did like 2 or 3 seasons of Saturday Night Live. Long story there, but I always liked her, and she plays the girlfriend, and he forgets dinner one night, and she breaks up with him. You're so selfish and all this stuff. But they've kind of had this tension in their relationship because she's like, oh, you lost your job again. And even though she does see that he's got this, she's like, man, you just got to find a place for this imagination, right? And he does. So then, even though she breaks up with him and he tries to get her back, but she won't, whatever. At the end, she shows up. But what she says at the end is really important because it's kind of like a Gone with the Wind moment. They're making it fun of him. But she says, you know, everybody wins and everything. She says, you know, those dreams you keep having. And he says, yeah. She says, you think I could be part of them?
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of men and for a lot of dreamers and a lot of misfits, like you're saying, like sometimes the people that we need are the ones right around us. And a lot of times that's our spouse. And a lot of times we're having conflict with a spouse because we haven't included them. We haven't said, I value your input. Come have a dream with me. Let's dream together. And as someone who has a wife who we've gone to a whole other country and back together and planted a church together and done all sorts of crazy stuff together. Like, I'm telling you, there's nothing like, let's do this together, you know?
Right.
And there have been times in my life when there's been tension because I've gone off and done something and we didn't really talk about it. You know, I felt like, well, God wants me to do this. But God doesn't want me to do it alone. Like that's not why he gave me a wife, is for her to be home while I go run off. Which
is, again, going back to that idea of the fruit, unpredictability, reliability.
Yes.
Like, excellent. You're just, because you're exactly right. That idea of, can you include me in the dream?
Yeah, include me.
Which is all she ever really wanted. She wasn't really critical of his dreams. It was just, they pulled him away from her.
She was never part of him.
Right.
Which we see that, right? Because she wasn't in any of his little daydreams until the end when she asked to be. And he's like, oh, now she's in Gone with the Wind. Yeah. Now he's got a new dream that she's a part of. And I think that's also good leadership is to say, hey man, I mean, our kids, our wives, and it's hard sometimes because I want to run ahead. I got the vision. I got the whatever. I want to run ahead, but God's, God wants the character, like I'm saying before. And sometimes you got to hold back a little bit and say, hey, what do you think about this? What would you like to be a part of this somehow? What do you see your role could be? Well, I would love to. You're really good at this. Maybe we could do this together or something like that, Yeah. And that takes a lot more energy, but there's so much more fruit in that, in your relationships, in your life, in the end. Yeah.
So our takeaway, action steps, call to action, whatever you want to call it. That idea, I love what you said, like stones in an altar. And again, that just aligns with what we've been talking about this whole time about when you're a stone in an altar, you have the most impact on the stones that are in your immediate proximity.
That's good. Yeah.
You're literally touching the people closest to you. And so that's the question is, who is it that is in that proximity that's God's calling you to be a mentor to help out, to some change, mister, to offer a hand to, or to say, hey, I need help. I want to offer you an opportunity. I need your guidance. I don't know what I'm doing. How can you impact those closest to you without feeling this need to be like, I need to go do something great there, or this is what my circle group needs to be. The closest people to you may be the people who are there. And so this has been Paul McDonald and Britt Mooney talking about UHF. I look for, maybe we might do we'll have to watch the Weird Al movie with Daniel Radcliffe. If it's good enough, we might actually talk about that. Check out our YouTube channel, like us, share us, subscribe, do the things. Cause seriously, I'm trying to grow this. I feel like this is really good. And there's stuff that we want to do. And we're limited by the fact that we don't have that many listeners. So if there's somebody who likes movies in your life, send this podcast to them who's like, oh man, Weird Al. If you talked about Weird Al, if you talk about movies, whatever. If you listen to this podcast on a regular basis, make it your mission this week to share it with one person who also likes movies, which I feel like that's a pretty big umbrella. Most people like movies.
Right. Yeah.
So thanks for joining us this week. And I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?